Omar, thank you so much for that. Actually, a lot of the things that you're going to say resonate very much with some of the goals and objectives. I'm going to take a slightly different spin and show you some slightly lower-flying technology of what we've been working on. The other thing I'm going to slightly correct is I think I was being a little bit too on the nose with this particular title, and when I actually put it on the slide, I looked at it, that it's just a beast of a title that is just nearly impenetrable. So I'm going to retitle it Me, Myself, and Virtual I, because it's very much going to resonate with what Omar talked about. Now, I'm going to actually start off with the acknowledgement slide. I know we usually do this at the end, but there's absolutely no way that these projects couldn't have come together with all these individuals helping them. In particular, I want to mention Ali Maslin and Michael Nietzsche, who are really the technical gurus and PIs on these particular projects. Without these individuals, there's no way that it could have come together. Paul Clifton was a PhD student who did a lot of work, which I'll show you early on. Jack Chang has been leading a lot of the later projects, and Georgina and Alison have been absolutely instrumental in making these things happen and getting the projects done. Of course, there's no way we couldn't have done any of this work without these fundamental financial support. So, as I said, truly collaborative, and no way it could have happened otherwise. So, in terms of the outline of the talk, I'm going to talk about two main projects. Before we do that, I'm going to get into a little bit of the goals and theoretical grounding. Then I'm going to talk about how we've used this grounding to hopefully enhance not necessarily motor performance, but indeed some spatial cognitive skills, which we'll talk about. And as Omar alluded to, human-computer interactions have come a long way. There's some of us out here who may remember these very simple devices, which is essentially a potentiometer and a button, right? Going from keyboard to a mouse, right? And now with all these new interfaces and working in the virtual world, it's becoming much more important to actually get people's actions to transfer to the virtual world. So this is where now we're sort of the theme of this session is about the integration and the application of fundamental knowledge into industrial settings. And this is where we're going to lean very heavily on what Bernard Hummel's work has been, and Wolfgang Prinz before him, and many people before talked about in terms of ideomotor coding and common coding. And these are these representations or features that are built together, linking perception action if you want to make those distinctions. Now, these common coding theories have very effectively described action selection, action effect prediction, joint action, how we work with other people, imagery and imagination, and action recognition. We're just taking this one slight step further of talking about using these theories in interactions in the virtual world. So our overall goals of this project is to leverage some of this theory, and this is where the title came from, but to leverage some of these theoretical principles to try to draw better connections between yourself and the virtual world, and then operate efficiently with that. And then, as I said, we have a better embodiment of the characters, and perhaps have some upstream training effects that help to change the way that we actually think. So the first part here, that's a very, very brief introduction. The first part here is I'll get into a series of studies in which we're actually first developing some of these technologies. They became known as EDC, or embodied visual creativity. Now, the first part of the design process was actually coming up with some kind of device that we can effectively transfer actions into the world. And for a number of reasons, they started working with puppets. And the first part of it was actually just determining what the best type of puppet that we could use in order to span and get the best interaction characteristics, about the expressions of the action and the ease of use. And so you can start with very, very simple things like stick puppets, right? With just like a little thing, puppet on the end of your stick, you can just rotate around. Very, very easy to use, but there's not much expressiveness in it because it only has the kind of maybe 3 dimensions and you can twist, and that's about it. And all the way on the other end, you can think of those very, very complex artistic types of puppets that are multi-jointed, multi-bodied, that have a great degree of expressiveness, but they become very, very complex to use. So where we decided to eventually settle on in the middle was these sort of broad types of puppets, which are multi-jointed, but are still able to use. And this was the initial prototype that we used. Okay, so you can see that the puppeteer has their hand out to control the head and the mouth, and then the arms are controlled by these rods. They're sort of, again, transferring or trying to get the best combination of expressiveness and ease of use. So the first part of the study that we wanted to do was just to see if you can actually identify your own movements in the virtual world using this puppet device. There's been a lot of work that has, in the past, has shown that when you make animations of an individual's point lights, so you put lights on the individual's parts of the body, get them to do actions, they can recognize their own actions, and identify their own actions from other people's actions. And this is work many, many years ago. So we were just leveraging that first to see if we can get the self-recognition. So we had the puppeteer and the puppet with these point lights on them, and we converted those point had them do a series of actions and converted those into point light display videos for this study. We had them do 3 different types of movements. Okay, these are called movement primitives in the gaming world: walking, jumping, and crouching. We had 5 trials of each movement, and we had them do it on their own. Then we had them do it with the puppet. Okay, we had it videotaped. Came back anywhere from a week to a month later for the actual study after they were converted to point lights. And we had them do a forced choice recognition task. I don't trust myself with videos. Actually, there's one video to show, but I generally don't trust myself with videos. So, but you can imagine what we had is these 2 videos of these 2 different individuals side by side, going through the actual animations itself, and you had to decide, choose which was your actions, and differentiate your action from the other person's action, just to say which of the sides was your action. And we had 4 display conditions. Pardon me. The first condition, we had the person only. We had their videos. Then, because of the way that the actions are transformed into the avatar's character, your character is often not your own body. So we had a situation, so we had a condition in which we resized everybody's body so that they were identical, so it was just the actions and the kinematics of the points. Then we had a puppet in a person condition, in which the point light displays were of the individual and of the moving puppet. And then we had a condition in which it was only the puppet. Okay. So again, we're playing these videos side by side, and the individual has to identify which is their own. What we found was that in all conditions, they were above chance. So people were able to recognize their own actions, differentiate their actions from those of others. They were best in the situations in which they had their own, their full body actions. And even they were fairly successful, they're very successful, sorry, in the person resized, so taking their own bodies and changing it to equate for just body size. And we were also above chance in these puppet conditions as well, which was very encouraging for us. So the overall conclusions thus far is that the individuals identified their own movement successfully, so we were quite happy with that. But the problem was, as I'm sure you can identify, these puppets are a little bit difficult to use. So it takes a lot of training in order to actually use these puppets. And if you want to have a really commercial device or something that's going to effectively transform your actions, you don't want to have that large training delay. The other problem was is that you needed motion capture in order to do that, and that's a real challenge for the use again, for the simplicity of use. So we designed, we designed this exoskeleton, which was made up of a series of essentially bones, which were wood, and then joints, which were made of potentiometers. So in our body puppet, the person would basically strap that puppet on, hold the arms. So the legs were actually strapped to the legs, and you held the arms out in front of you. The neck was strapped basically to the neck. Okay? And then the signals from the potentiometer, once calibrated properly, would be transformed onto the movements of this avatar. And so initially, what we wanted to do was to, so this is the only video I'll trust, just so you can get a sense of what's going on. So here's the avatar. It's a bit crude, not quite as pretty as the dolphin. Okay, but you can see that as the person's walking through, you get a reasonably good. This is Paul, the PhD student who's largely responsible for this. Okay, if you do the twist, those twisting actions are actually transformed fairly accurately. This was a little bit of an earlier version, so the animations become a little bit more smooth. But you can see that the actions themselves are transferred fairly well onto the avatar itself. So what we did then was we wanted to know, can you recognize your own movements again? Again, can you identify with the avatar? And basically ran exactly the same experiment with a series of different movements. I'm not going to bother going through them. The overall message is that, again, people were above chance in recognizing their own actions, even though the avatar was the same for everyone. So there is some degree of self-recognition when you're transforming your actions in that regard. Now, it's not only important to know about the embodiment, but we also wanted to know about the usability. That is this input device actually as effective or more effective than some of these other devices? And they came up with this Teapot touching game. Now, teapots are kind of a funny thing in the computer graphics world, because it's kind of one of those inside jokes that every first example of a graphic is the teapot. Like, how do you design a teapot? And so they decided that they wanted to smash the hell out of all the teapots they could. So they designed this game, and what you do is you control the avatar, and you control the arms and legs such that it would go around and smash these teapots, and then a new teapot would appear, you would smash that out, and so on and so forth. Now, we had a bunch of expert gamers come in and play the game using the embodied puppet device that we designed, and the Xbox devices which they are comfortable using, as well as keyboards. Okay, so these are the three different conditions in which we had the people play this Teapot game. And the results were quite encouraging. That is that the performance on the embodied puppet was better than the keyboard condition, and even though it was not statistically different than the Xbox, it was of a modest effect size, suggesting that indeed the most hits and the most success. And this is the first time that they used this puppet device, and these are gamers that have lots of experience using all these other input devices. So we felt fairly comfortable that even without training, most people could use this thing properly. Now, even though I've diagrammed successful Teapot kids here, we also had one of my favorite dependent variables, which was inter-Teapot touching time. The average amount of time between each Teapot. as I said, is my favorite dependent variable so far. So overall conclusions associated with the first part here is that that users' actions can be effectively identified in the movements of an avatar if those movements are transferred over. And this new HC device, or HCI device, pardon me, effectively when it transforms those actions, even without much training, you're able to perform successfully in virtual. So moving beyond, a while ago we gave him a green suit, jazzed him up with a little bow tie, and he's off to the ball into new things. We've explored ideas very similar to what Omar's been talking about. We've explored ideas of using this in rehab, and we've also done some studies on tool use and embodiment, which we can talk about later. But what I'm going to move on to now is the next series of studies, which leaves behind the puppet, but still talks about using tangibles and other types of interfaces in the virtual world. A task is the acronym for Tangibles for Augmenting Spatial Cognition. And again, this is a title that kind of hits you on the nose, but basically we're using tangible interfaces to see if we can, in the virtual world, improve spatial abilities. The reason why we wanted to use spatial abilities is that spatial abilities predict success in STEM learning, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So there's lots and lots of research on games and very task-specific games about how, say, you improve a surgeon's skill in the virtual world. What we think is a bit more of the novelty here is we're actually trying to take a step back from that, and instead of just working on the skills specific, we're trying to work on the skills that underlie those general skills, that is, the spatial abilities. The first experiment that I'm going to present to you is work on mental rotation. That is, how you are able to mentally rotate an object in space. And in the mental rotation task, we had a series of different conditions. Okay? But basically what the participant would be presented with is these two boxes without any information on the inside. You would see some kind of animation of the top box. Okay? You would have to remember that animation. You remember that type of rotation of that top box. And then you'd be presented with an object and then a series of choices at the bottom, and you'd have to choose which was the object that was represented after that task. So you would have to take this object here and mentally rotate it into the right space and decide which was the one. So in this game, we had them play this teapot touching game. And in this teapot touching game, what I didn't mention before is that you played it in these different orientations. And what actually happened is the camera in the video world would slowly rotate around the individual in a kind of a random way, such that you constantly had to remap how you were moving in the world and rotate where your arms and limbs were going relative to the teapot in order to touch it. Now we had three different groups. One group played this with the avatar, with the puppet device, again with the Xbox, and then finally with the keyboard. And not perfect results, but certainly encouraging results. In that the only group that actually showed a significant improvement, so this is an accuracy of the responses on that mental rotation task, is that the only group that showed a significant increase was the group that played it in the embodied puppet. Okay? The Xbox group and the keyboard group did show some improvement, but not a statistically significant. Now, the interaction did not come out, so we can't say that there was a statistically better improvement in the puppet group. However, as I said, at least some encouraging influence here that we see that there is some change, at least in that group. The next task we wanted to look at was on perspective taking. Okay? So basically taking this image, and perspective taking is another one of those important spatial abilities. It's been shown to be distinct from mental rotation. They're similar but distinct skills. And in this perspective taking, you're given a scene such as this, and then you're given a series of bird's eye view scenes, and you have to decide which of these bird's eye view scenes best represents that. So you have to take a different perspective in the world. The perspective taking task that we use is one that Haggerty and colleagues developed back a few years ago, but 10 years ago now, in which what the job was is, so you're presented with a series of these objects, and you're given instructions, and just I'll read it out because it's probably too small to see, but it says, imagine you're standing at the stop sign facing the flower, point to where the car is. So you have to imagine that you're standing in front of the stop sign here, facing the flower, and then you have to point on this circle, and then you have to imagine where the car is. You're given this scenario on the circle, and then you have to draw somewhere on this circle that scene. And I like this measure a little bit more because you can actually get a much more continuous measure of ability here, in that you can get an angular error. So if that's where the individual's response were, that's what they said where the car is relative to the stop sign, okay, the correct angle is there, you can actually get, again, a much more resolute idea of their error in their. Now for the training game, we had a different game, and we have what we call the perspective training game, very creatively. Okay? The way that this game works is that you had two views. Okay? On the ground view, there were two fences, and the two fences had holes in them. Okay? And when you aligned the two fences, or the holes in the two fences, you had a horse that would come through to you on the in the world. Okay? This was, by the way, this was done in Oculus. Okay, so you had full 3D embodied virtual reality, and Leap Motion capture was able to transform the movement of your arms into the virtual world. And if we have some more time later, if we have some video up online on Vimeo, if you want to check it out, and after I'm done the presentation, and I trust video a little bit more, I can show you that. Okay? So you had these two views. Now, in this game, you couldn't move the fences. So the fences were initially, the holes in the fences were initially unaligned, and you had to line up the fences in order to get a horse through. Okay? Now, on the ground view, you could see the holes in the fences and know where they are. In the top view, you had no idea where the fences were, but you had these godlike hands that could actually move the fences. So you had to transform where you thought the holes in the fences were into the virtual world and move the fences to line them up. Then you could switch back to the other. And it was these blocks that you would move in the real world in order to move the fences in the virtual world. Now, to get a little bit more at the differences in perspective, you could play this task every time you switch from the ground view to the bird view, you had a different perspective. So here's one where you're perfectly aligned with your arms in the virtual world. But at random moments, depending on the different conditions that we had set up, sometimes you'd be doing it at an angular, so you had to rotate yourself into the image, okay? Or it could be completely opposite. It could be anywhere in I can't remember exactly how many different rotations it was, but you could do it in all these different rotations. So you had to constantly change your perspective in order to get the succeed task. We had 3 different interface groups. So we had our tangible embodied interface group. We had a group that played it on a keyboard condition, a control condition. And then finally we had a real rudimentary control group. And all they did is they still interacted in the computer way, but what they did is a bunch of boring math tasks and sort of these, type out the words that you see on the screen. Okay? So they still had the same amount of time between pre and post tests, okay? But they were doing things that didn't have anything to do with perspective. Here's the data here. So remember, we're looking at angular error. So in this particular case, improvement in performance is a decrease in the error. And again, not an overwhelming effect in that the interaction was not significant. But again, the group that interacted with the tangible embodied interface was the only group that showed a significant pre-post change in this perspective task. The other group showed small improvements. They were not statistically significant. And here's the individual data. And they are a little bit more convincing in that basically everyone in the group, the tangible group, showed some kind of improvement. We see a real random kind of scattering of the other two groups. So again, not what we were necessarily hoping for, but this is after only 10 minutes of roughly 10 minutes of intervention in student areas. So we, I say, are very encouraged by these results and are starting to move on more. So overall, what I'm hoping to at least convince you of at this particular point, that these tangible and embodied interfaces allow you to embody the character a little bit more, embody the avatar a little bit more, develop the connection like Laura was just talking about. It enhances performance in the virtual world with very, very little training. And hopefully, and this is I put a little question mark, because I'm going to be very cautious on that final conclusion, but there does seem to be some preliminary evidence that you can support some of these upstream influences on spatial cognition. Overall, what I'm really hoping to get across here, across these 2 talks, and then with Max in the next talk, is that, for a long time, I personally have gone through a state where it's like, no, I'm not going to do a lot of applied research. I'm not going to, I want to stay fundamental. I want to stay on the mechanism. I want to stay on the mechanism. I think it really is important. We can't get away. There's a big move. There was a big move in Canada to start supporting these industrial interactions, and there's a lot of money, a lot of grant money being thrown at it. And I think those are important. Before I was kind of rejecting them, but now I'm really embracing them. But we can't ignore the fundamental mechanism these interactions are really, really important. And we should really be looking at a continuum. I think, again, I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but fundamental to applied science continuum. That the best applied science is based on mechanism, and the best fundamental science is not lost, not completely immune to what the effects are for everybody. So I'll wrap up here and say, here's a few citations of some of the work that summarizes. Generally, we have we've written a couple of chapters in this human-computer interface book, in which we capture a lot of these theoretical fundamental ideas and try to communicate them to the computer world. Here's a paper that wraps up and summarizes a lot of the work in the associated video from that embodied puppet. And here's some of our work on spatial skills. And I'll plug Paul's paper in a Psychonomic journal, Cognitive Research Principles and Implications, that was published a few years ago. And with that, I'll wrap up, and I'd be happy to take some of your questions.
This is really neat stuff. I'm interested with your puppet, and I might be asking you to kind of speculate here. We have an interesting situation there where the puppet exists mapped on to your body in this real physical space, but then you're also showing representation of the puppet in the virtual space, and you're embodying the puppet to some extent. Is that embodiment occurring in the physical space, in the virtual space, both? Do you think, what's the representation going on there? Are you is it existing simultaneously in both? Or are they separate representations?
That's a fascinating question that I will not do anything but speculate on. And my suspicion is both, as I think, and I think some of Bernard's was presenting, was it? I can't remember now, but there's, if you do some object, after you engage in this, if there are some threatening influences, my suspicion is that you would feel threatened by that. And my suspicion is that you would feel more threatened in these situations than you would where your actions are more effectively transformed onto the avatar, and you have embodied that more than if you were doing some kind of keyboard influence or button pressing. So there is a paper presented, I can't remember what's published now, but the rubber, you can get a full body rubber hand illusion, a rubber body illusion, if you would. Exactly, the virtual stroking paper. So my suspicion is that it might not be quite as effective as that, and until we include some kind of actuators and things that you get some spatosensory feedback as well from when you get that multisensory experience. But my sense is that you do develop a tight connection. So to sort of follow on an anecdote that Omar was talking about, as I said, we had started to build some connections with rehab institutes around the Georgia area, and we had a couple of pilot patients come in who were recovering from stroke, and very similar. One of the comments was from one of the ladies who was recovering. She says, "Wow, that's me up there." Right, so it's only anecdotal, but it does speak to that idea that you are really developing this connection. You really are embodying it, and my suspicion is that it's a simultaneous embodiment. You don't lose yourself completely, but it is simultaneous. But I don't have anything beyond my own suspicions.
Yes, one more. Have you been considering at all? You're doing mostly this sort of mapping of the motor stuff to what the visual consequences. Have you thought at all or looked about or familiar with anyone else who's looking at kind of the actual visual consequences in terms of these avatars, whether you're seeing sort of third person versus first person, or something we're using both in some of the different experiments where the hands are kind of in that first person perspective versus I'm seeing the whole avatar body as I'm outside of it. Does it matter?
I think it would matter. I'm trying to make. I don't know for sure, but I'm trying to make a link to the action observation literature and what they would suggest in first versus third body action observation. And my memory of it is that first person and actually Emma, a PhD student, is helping out. She can speak maybe a little bit more about the imagination and about how imagination in the first and third person. And correct me if I'm wrong, but imagination, it depends on the individual, which is actually more effective. Is that the case?
first person imagery tends to activate the motor system a little bit more, but there's also it's the other way around.
So thanks a lot for that, Tim. So one of the challenges of doing applied research, especially in this domain, is that the speed of research and the speed of technological development are not compatible. And so, especially in this domain, we're threatening to be swamped by immersive virtual reality technologies, which blow anything about embodiment out of the water. Like, I mean, as soon as you're in the Vive or the Oculus, it's like you're in a completely new world. And so, I guess, do you see advantages to your puppet-based system versus something that's just going to be full body motion capture, put me in VR, and only cost me like $5,000? I mean, because that's where it's going, I think, and we're going to be recording, hundreds of sensory motor data channels, and it's not going to be that expensive. So I just sort of wonder what your thoughts are on that.
No, it's very practical, and the work with the puppet, we have evolved from working with the puppet. The puppet is unwieldy. That was work that was done at least 5-6 years ago, and that's where in the more recent work we were using the leap motion because it can actually transform the arms a little bit more. And really what we're playing around with a little bit now is what's the necessary components of your body in the virtual world, right? As I said, we've done a little bit of work on virtual tool embodiment. So if you're using a tool in the virtual world, does that then transfer back to the real world? And our initial evidence says yes. We're still working on it. Initial evidence says yes. But then the issue becomes, well, what's the most important part of the experience in the virtual world? Do you need the multisensory experience? Because in our initial experiments, the person was actually holding a physical rake, moving an object, feeling all of that, and just seeing the information in the virtual world. And that seemed to be functional. So so if you take the rake away and now they're just holding a Wii remote, and the Wii remote actually represents the rake, and you still see all that, is that going to work? Or do you need the multisensory experience? Our initial work suggests that actually it doesn't, that you still get embodiment in a variety of different things. Those are exactly the things we're starting to tinker around with, and again, why it's important for us to continue to engage and be involved in that kind of work, to continually test what's the most important critical features. Because if it's just the person's actions and they don't need that multisensory experience, I think